Metal the Last Chapter. That's a confusing title right away because I thought it would have multiple chapters. A fanfiction by Flynn. We start out with the narration reminding us of when Shadow fell to Earth in SA2, where presumably he was too exhausted of chaos energy to just teleport himself to safety with chaos control. Not even Sonic thought to do that for him. What's annoying is that the narration tells you to imagine yourself as Shadow, and because of this, it insists on referring to Shadow as you, which is intrusive and very distracting. The narration talks about how Shadow is overheating from falling to Earth. Makes sense. And then at some point, he actually does think to use chaos control, because he remembers Maria wanting him to make people happy. So if he could just do that, why didn't he do it as soon as possible? This is the first fanfiction by Flynn where, if it wasn't by Flynn and thus begging to be reviewed, I wouldn't have made it past the first paragraph. Because that kind of second-person narration is just irritating. I've never read a fanfiction with that mistake before. It's hard to focus on it. The narration says that after he said chaos control, he didn't have to deal with the heat nearly as much, but kept falling at the same rate. And what was once an endless coastline in blue has turned into grassy hills, trees, and more blue. The blue of the sky. Eventually he does fall, and digs a trench in the ground in the process. Wait, so what was the point of him using chaos control then? What exactly did it do if it could just teleport him to safety and stop his momentum outright? And after a time skip, finally, thank God, we get actually good narration. This gets me invested in the story properly. We're told about Shadow waking up all tired with the sun coming through the windows, and he's in a room with the walls made of wooden panels, and in a bed that's also made of wood. So it's taking place in his house, I guess. I was expecting him to wake up in Eggman's lab. Then we're told that the door to his bedroom was opened up, and a 6-year-old girl went into his room and hopped onto his bed, jostling him. Shadow smiled gently. Well, that's sweet. He needs her to tell him where he is, and she tells him that he was brought to her grandpa's house after she found him. He confirms to her that she helped Sonic stop the Ark, so this has to be post-amnesia then. And Shadow wonders how such a young girl could know about the Ark trying to collide with Earth. How stupid is he to wonder that? Even in the game itself, we saw a whole bunch of scenes showing the reactions of various human civilians to the Ark heading for Earth. You'd think Shadow would have learned that the near destruction of the world made it to the news, even if he didn't assume everyone would know about it outright. Wouldn't he know that the news was a thing now after Eggman woke him up? In fact, wouldn't he be aware that Gerald made an announcement to everyone on the planet about his plan? He was in on it. So him wondering why this girl knew he saved the world is just stupid. Everyone would know. Well, at least this stupid mistake livened things up for me. What else has it got? Then Old Man cautiously goes into Shadow's room, or rather the guest room he was being loaned. And he tells the little girl to stop disturbing him and wash up for supper. I'm surprised that the narration didn't tell us that this girl was reminding Shadow of Maria. In fact, we didn't even learn the girl's name. That's how lazy this writer is. I don't know the old man's name either. It would have taken 2 seconds to come up with the names Emily and Bob. Shadow's at least a decent enough person to thank the old man for rescuing him, but I don't know what he rescued him from. I'm missing basic context here. The old man looks at him resentfully, and Shadow notices and wonders how he could have earned his hate. Really? He doesn't know why people would hate him? Trying to destroy the world in SA2 and working for Black Doom are pretty easy excuses for it. He'd have to really spectacularly lack self-awareness. Then it turns out that by coincidence, the little girl's name is Maria. Well, that was nice, if really coincidental. Am I gonna learn what Shadow was rescued from by a regular civilian? No? We skip ahead in time again when Shadow opens his eyes again at the sound of the door opening and the click of dishes. The narration's written kind of pretentiously, like, the light of the hallway invaded, guiding the grandfather to Shadow's bedside lamp. This is the kind of wording that's trying too hard. Why can't it just be written informally instead of trying to be a freaking novel? It's harder to understand what's being conveyed that way. Light held the room once more. Can't you just say the room was bright again? Maria puts a breakfast tray on Shadow's legs, giving him supper, and her grandpa puts pillows under his shoulders, as if to imply that Shadow was injured at this point. Apparently I was supposed to just assume that. Shadow warns her that he doesn't want her to cut herself on his spines by accident, and her grandpa leaves the room, but stops pretty close to the doorway, making Shadow concerned. Maria offers a spoonful of soup to him, and we're told that Shadow doesn't know if he even needs to eat, because he'd once gone weeks without food or drink. I refuse to believe that. If he's an organic life form, he needs to eat. Period. Also, if this is taking place right after the end of SA2, after Shadow fell from Earth, well, I don't think the entirety of Sonic Adventure 2 took place in the span of weeks. I think it would take place in like a few days or a day. Eggman even had a time limit because of his threatening the world. Shadow only existed for a week before he lost Maria. So then he would pass out, wake up 50 years later, and then, what, he'd go a few days since SA2? He would have never had the time to go weeks without food or drink. I guess Flynn never heard that he was only in the Ark for, like, a week. Because I think that was only something the Japanese manual of SA2 established. But you'd think such a huge fan of Japanese canon against American canon would have learned about that Japanese factoid. He enjoys the soup and compliments it, and realizes that being polite and decent like that is what Maria wanted. Sure wish Shadow was like this today. Doesn't Flynn insist on making him a complete jerk in IDW and falsely scapegoating Sega for it? Quite a change from here where he's the exact opposite of what you'd expect Shadow to be, and it works. Though mainly because he's hurt and being taken care of, so he kinda has to be polite to them. Finally, he asks her how she found him, and she says that she saw him falling from the sky as a shooting star. Wait, what? But he doesn't have amnesia at this point, and when he fell from the sky, that's when he got amnesia. So unless this was written before Heroes came out, maybe this is taking place after Heroes and Shadow in universe. So it's after Shadow somehow got unlucky enough to fall from the sky again. Presumably while exhausted of chaos energy to the point where he could just chaos control warp to safety. Again. It's like this is an alternate universe rewriting of what really happened after Shadow fell to Earth. Where this is what happened instead of Eggman rescuing him with a robot. I like this better, so far. It's charming how she says that it'd be very silly to have a star in the daytime. I'm not sure what this Maria character looks like though. So I'm just picturing her as looking just like Maria, Shadow the Hedgehog. She explains that when she found Shadow, she got someone to get his truck and drive him down to the village, and the doctor came, who didn't know how to fix him, because doctors still make house visits. Somehow he didn't think anything in Shadow was broken, even though he apparently needs taken care of right now. So Maria was right, he really is a stupid doctor. Maria somehow thinks he's all better, even though Shadow says that it'll take a day or two to get back on his feet. She hopes he'll stay with her, and her impatient grandpa tells her to go to bed because she's already done feeding him, not wanting her to talk to him more than necessary, not that he admits this. He does make it obvious he doesn't like him when he pauses before calling Shadow guest though. It's intriguing. It does make sense that some of the civilians of the world would have a lot of distaste for Shadow. He tried to destroy the world, just like Gerald did, and he's not exactly known for being a likable person. Showing civilians as not liking and trusting Shadow is a great way to make him more sympathetic. And it shows the realistic consequences of his actions and personality coming back to bite him, making things more believable. Sadly, I can't remember any times in the Sonic franchise where I saw a clear-cut portrayal of how the civilians think of Shadow. We're probably supposed to assume they all just see him as a good guy, even though they have good reason to dislike him for being an antisocial, arrogant jerk, and be afraid of him considering how powerful he is. And who doesn't imagine Shadow with a hair-trigger temper? So I can't blame this guy for not liking him and wanting his granddaughter to not get influenced by him too much. Shadow gets called Mr. Shadow by the little girl who's apparently not out of the room yet, and she somehow not Cream the Rabbit, despite thinking that calling him that makes sense. And based on Shadow asking, "How do you?" I'm guessing he's asking her how she knows his name. But again, that's extremely stupid. Unless he's completely unaware of the existence of the news media, he shouldn't be questioning how he's famous. Well, I guess nobody told him the news existed in the week he lived on the Ark. Even though he knew of Gerald's message. He had to have. Maybe this works. Maybe it's just a side effect of how ridiculously naive his short life makes him. The old man watches Maria go down the hall to make sure she gets to bed. Geez, more untrusting than Shadow. And he takes the tray from Shadow's lap. Shadow says they should talk, probably being proactive because he's curious about why he's hated. The grandfather looks at him suspiciously, but then all Shadow says afterwards is that something's not right, and it'd be best if Maria was spared any hostilities. And then the grandpa actually agrees with him and leaves. That's all? They're not gonna have a whole conversation about why he doesn't like Shadow? That's all Shadow says? The grandpa wouldn't just agree, he wouldn't stop being overprotective of his granddaughter that easily. There's a time skip to the next day, which is implied to be like the previous one, and Shadow's trying to pick at the loose strands of his memory and follow them as far back as he can. And we're told that 50 years of suspended animation had made his memory blurry. But why? As far as he should be aware, he fell asleep 50 years ago and then woke up seconds later from his perspective. His memories from 50 years ago shouldn't be blurry, they feel really recent to him. That's why he was still so attached to Maria. He remembers helping out Gerald and his scientists in mundane days, so mundane that not even the writer cared about telling us what he did to help. Because that'd be too interesting. He could at least write that Shadow handed Gerald some materials. He remembers his talks with Maria, not that we learn about what they said, because that would require effort from a lazy writer. And then we're told about Gunn's forces hunting him down, as I wonder why Shadow didn't instantly leave them completely in the dust with his super speed while carrying Maria. Logically, there's no reason for the soldiers to be keeping up with Shadow like that. It's amazing how an engaging cutscene with great music and presentation can distract you from how illogical it actually is for years to come. And when he relived that memory, he had to stop thinking altogether and concentrate on the quilt pattern or digesting food. The narration's telling me that Shadow is meditating in solitude, trying to use calming exercises. The old man, who still doesn't have a proper name, walks up to him and says Maria's playing at a friend's house. There's a silence, and Shadow asks how she knows who he is and about the Ark. Finally, Shadow's told that it was globally televised. Eggman had set up a series of satellites to televise the use of the Eclipse cannon on the Earth, and the colony nearly hit them. And somehow Shadow's surprised by this, and didn't know the Eggman had gone so far. Even though he was working for Eggman earlier, he was working with him when he blasted the moon half apart. And how is he only just now being told about this instead of Maria telling him this the minute he asked? Well, at least I can commend the story on not being contrived, in the sense that it would have been more contrived to have this old man somehow be related to Gerald Robotnik and Maria, and that's why he knows about him in the Ark. Instead, for once Flynn kept it simple, and it was just that he knows just because everyone else does. Because it seemed like the kind of contrived twist he was going to be going for, because this girl is coincidentally named Maria, and she's coincidentally being taken care of by her grandfather. Finally, he asks why he hates him. He really is naive. The old man says that if Shadow was Sonic, he'd hate him more, and with better reason. Huh? And he has no use for crazy hedgehogs or the disaster they bring. Naturally, Shadow says he doesn't understand. The old man says that every time Eggman shows up, and fortunately he hates Eggman, Sonic does too. And Sonic wants to show off more than save people. Shadow's irritated by the accusation because Sonic could have been killed fighting the Bio Lizard. Gee, I wish Shadow had that kind of respect for Sonic nowadays, instead of being a bad rival to him. Then he's told that when Eggman tried to blow up Station Square, Tails had to save it instead of Sonic. And when Chaos drowned 3,000 people flooding half the city, as opposed to all of it, well, that's less dark. Maria's parents were killed, but miraculously, she wasn't. I guess she was vacationing with her grandpa at the time. So he blames Sonic for not preventing the flooding, when he should really hate Eggman and Chaos a lot more. To be fair, if Sonic just wisened up and killed Eggman before he ever discovered Chaos, that whole flood could have been prevented. So if that's where this guy is going with this, that's a very justified reason to resent him. Sonic clearly cares more about not feeling bad about killing Eggman and keeping his life exciting than actually getting rid of him and solving the problem permanently, which you'd think militaries would be focused on, like Gunn. And that makes me wonder why Eggman wasn't taken down by them. It's probably one of the biggest plot holes in all of Sonic. Sonic and his friends wouldn't want to kill Eggman, but the militaries of the world would. And yet, there's never any mention of him constantly dodging their assassination attempts and attacks on his base, when you'd think they would be much more of a bother to him than a few measly teenagers. Realistically, Gunn would be way more of the hero of the world against Eggman than these teenagers who don't want to kill him. Anyways, Shadow tells the old man about what his Maria wanted, and how he wants to make the world happy. And and we're told that the old man stopped interrupting his conversations with his granddaughter after a thoroughly uninterested and bored reaction to Maria. You'd think he'd at least sympathize with him after learning what happened to Maria. Then a few days later, Shadow wakes up at night with a bad feeling, with bright lights moving back and forth outside his window. A gun patrol pod hovers up to one of the windows, illuminating him in red light, making me wonder if they're going to hire him for gun at this point. The door gets destroyed, and some robots march in and kidnap him, grabbing him by the arms. You'd think he would have had plenty of time to obliterate all of them with his super speed spin attack, but I guess he let himself get captured and never really cared. He gets hauled down the stairs and brought to the village square, and there's no sign of the villagers as he sees a dozen gun trucks parked between the homes. The assault droids march him over to a young commander named Commander Creed talking with a soldier, and he tells Shadow that after the Ark incident, the public's confidence has been shaken, and with him behind bars again and his story released to the press, the world will be able to see that they can at least keep him from doing further damage. At least this makes sense, kinda. But Shadow clearly tried to save the world, and Sonic had to have told people about it. Wouldn't people have seen him in space with Sonic? Naturally, Shadow says that he's not interested in evil plants anymore, and he's told his capture means that Gun is the most powerful weapon at their disposal, as well as public support, somehow, when he doesn't deserve to be captured. And apparently, he'd be in trouble if he didn't do this, because there's more hedgehogs, cats, and weasels out there than he thinks. How is that response enough to explain why he thinks capturing Shadow would save his ass? It'd make a lot of sense if he hired Shadow for Gun at this point. Like they hired Rouge in the previous Flynn fanfiction. Then Shadow asks where Maria is. And then he's told that he was framed for razing the whole village to the ground when really it was Gun who did that. I should have known that a writer as mean-spirited as Flynn wouldn't be able to stand writing a whole story without tragedy. He could have easily just let the little girl live perfectly fine and kept it as an innocent story where Shadow gets taken care of after he was hurt. Instead, Flynn's penchant for pointless over-the-top drama reared its ugly head just like it did in Coming of Age. Which really makes me wonder why he had the restraint to not roboticize the Teletubbies and destroy their world in his other fanfiction. So they got a happy ending? And this girl didn't? Was he intentionally trying to piss people off? Here, with the character who's actually likable, Flynn has to get her murdered. Although at least it's off-screen, so we get spared some drama. The commander brags that he'll get away with it, being portrayed as a generic bad guy without any sort of realistic response for what he did, and he calls Shadow pathetic for being upset and feeling like he let Maria down. In fact, he's so over-the-top cartoonishly evil that he taunts Shadow for Maria's death, doing the textbook definition of bullying the dragon. When I write stories, I worry that I make the characters too sympathetic. But that's nothing compared to Flynn's demonizing characters past the point of rationality. This is hardly the only time he's made characters ridiculously unlikable, and I thought I was bitter. Of course, Shadow kicks the commander in the gut and sends him flying, and bouncing off the side of one of the vans. Somehow it took the soldiers and robots a full 30 seconds to realize Shadow was free and hostile. Really? 30 seconds? I guess he was completely left alone with the officer then. I pictured a bunch of soldiers a couple feet away from him, all wrapped up in their conversations. Why would he be alone with him? At no point did I ever picture that. Shadow destroys all the robots and missile hives, and apparently he's written to destroy the human soldiers as well, with his spines. And he uses his jet shoes to chase down the fleeing vehicles, and sends them screeching off the thin mountain roads and exploding far below. With his anger and energy spent, he kneels in the street gasping for air with angry tears in his eyes. At least he was portrayed with those, so it humanizes him and makes him more sympathetic. And wait, somehow Commander Creed had escaped in all that commotion? You'd think that he would have died the minute Shadow attacked him and he bounced off a van 10 feet away. I guess not. Can't have the unlikable character get what he really deserves. Meanwhile, let's destroy the one likable character other than Shadow out of complete nowhere out of spite for him. So you can't even really get catharsis out of this, when that's supposed to be the whole appeal of Shadow fighting Gun. Shadow remembers when Creed told him that the people wouldn't care that his brutality was apparently the way of the world, and he wants to make people care, and plans to use Eggman to bring the people together and act as they should. He sighs and plans on working with Eggman, destroying him at the end, and controlling the people of the world himself. That way, organizations like Gun wouldn't exist and the people would be happy. You know, aside from the fact that they'd be living in fear of him. So this story ended with Shadow planning to take over the world to make people happy for Maria. Sound familiar? Well, no wonder Flynn had that idea in Archie. He really likes trying to bring his fanfiction to life. First he brought Bean the Dynamite back and wrote him like he did in 3B, then he made the Freedom Fighters fight Dark Legionnaires as their main enemy because it happened in Other M, then he made his Other M freedom fighting team canon in Jenny Ka's universe, then he made Abraham Tower the actual name of the guy, then he made Flying Frog crazy in that same fanfiction, and now we've got this, explaining why he made Shadow take over the world in the future. Maria's words would really have to be contorted to justify him doing that. But I guess he really deluded himself that he was in the right. You know, it's not that original of him to be just reusing ideas from his own fan works instead of just coming up with brand new ones. So this story, like Coming of Age, took an unexpected dark twist at the end because Flynn just wants to write tragedies. Because in a franchise about a talking blue hedgehog, making most of your stories as dark as possible makes perfect sense. I'm sure he absolutely loved this franchise. Aside from the terrible second-person narration at the start of the story, it was good when Shadow was being taken care of. I like seeing how polite and decent he could be to people, and seeing him be vulnerable for a change, even if it was nothing exciting. It was intriguing to see a civilian resent Shadow, but sadly, instead of him resenting Shadow for the actually intuitive reasons that you'd expect, he just hated him because superpowered hedgehogs just bring trouble. And he turned out to be right. Because instead of Flynn letting the sweet little girl live, like you'd expect literally any writer for a children's franchise to do, out of complete nowhere, Gunn destroys the village Shadow is in, and plans to capture him and frame him for it. At least we were spared actually seeing Maria get killed, and it was nice that she had the same name as Maria for thematic sake. But it really comes off as bitter and spiteful of the writer that instead of ending his story on a happy note, he just went for an insanely dark, over-the-top twist, making a commander ridiculously evil for no reason whatsoever, instead of just being happy with a simple story about Shadow being taken care of by a sweet little girl. It feels unprofessional to me, because it's like he writes Sonic stories for stress relief by tormenting the characters involved. At least not every story he writes is overly dark, but a lot of them are, for no good reason. You'd think that the fanbase would have a problem with that, since they demonize any time Sonic takes itself seriously for 2 seconds. They talk like it's just something to be mocked. It's just really glaring to me that the majority of the fanfictions he's written are needlessly dark and depressing, in a franchise where you'd expect a more charming tone, full of likable characters. In theory, it was a compelling reason for Shadow to start trying to take over the world. Better than no explanation, like 25 years later. But it was so grim that it was spiteful. Him being brainwashed would make more sense.